My name is David Fekete, and I'm president of the Edmonton Interfaith Centre. I grew up in a scientifically oriented family. There were engineers and scientists in my family, and I'm pretty sure my father was an atheist. So my ordination and my turn to religion was difficult for me. I got my bachelor's degree in philosophy of science because I wanted to make a bridge between science and theology, so philosophy of science seemed to be the way to do it. I received my master's degree from Harvard University and went on to the University of Virginia for my PhD. I've been in Edmonton about 10 years. I was in Florida before I moved up here, and I like the climate here better. You can't ski in Florida. Well, with no further ado, I'm going to launch into my talk about a virtue. Hang on, I'm going to move this back a little. I'm hearing some feedback. About a virtue called frugality. Frugality. And I'm basing very much of what I say on a theologian by the name of James A. Nash. James A. Nash, who wrote a whole book on the subject and a shorter article. When we think about today's environmental crisis, we tend to think in terms of science. We see global warming as the result of greenhouse gases generated by fossil fuels. We talk about auto emissions or industrial waste. We seek to solve these problems, again, by the application of science, such as alternative energy sources, cleaner emissions, hybrid or electrical automobiles, recycling. But these efforts do not get at the underlying causes for our present ecological crisis. The underlying cause for our ecological problems is spiritual, not scientific. While science and technology can ameliorate the problems of the environment, they do not address the underlying spiritual cause. Our present environmental crisis is the result of excessive consumer demand and unbridled production to feed that demand. Present-day consumption and production is structured to fulfill human cravings for more, better, bigger, newer, and more prestigious goods. In terms of classical Christianity, craving goods in this manner would be considered sinful. Specifically, the sins called greed, gluttony, envy, and vanity would be seen as driving Western economics. In my Swedenborgian tradition, spirituality means renouncing sin and adopting good. This practice can be applied as a spiritual solution to today's environmental crisis. The spiritual solution is the renunciation of greed, gluttony, envy, and vanity, and the collective adoption of the Christian virtues called frugality and charity. Frugality includes the renunciation of greed and the practice of Christian charity by giving and caring for our wider social and natural environment. Environmental problems also can be seen as a product of a broken relationship between humanity and God on the one hand, and between humanity and nature on the other hand. Personally and collectively, a lifestyle of greed, gluttony, envy, and vanity interrupts the relationship with God, and adopting an ethic of frugality and Christian love restores the relationship with God and with the environment. Frugality works as a spiritual solution for a spiritual problem because the whole created order, Humans and nature is sacred. The whole created order is sacred space. This includes nature and humanity. We need to recognize that humanity is part of God's sacred created order. It's not as though there were humans who stand apart from the created order, nature. It's not as if there are humans over here and nature over here. Rather, humans are within nature. In the Bible, God creates water, the land, the plants and the animals, and man and woman. When the whole created order is complete, including man and woman, then God looks upon it and says that it's very good. So humanity's part of the natural order, and it is in the sacred space of the world created by God. Let's talk a little bit about frugality. Frugality means moderating our craving for material goods. It's a virtue that stands opposite the cardinal sins of greed, gluttony, envy, and vanity. The cardinal sins are considered vexations of the soul that cause spiritual unrest. They oppose contentment with God's grace and provision. They oppose Christian love, generosity, and solidarity with one's fellows. The vexing nature of the cardinal sins can be seen by the discontent characterizing a person that never seems to have enough. A frugal person is content with moderate possessions and stands in solidarity with the whole created order, other humans and the natural world. Frugality involves a moderation of human cravings, and as such it's a kind of self-denial. But it needs to be said that frugality is not holy poverty or asceticism. It's not the extinction of desires, but rather moderation of desires. It's putting a limit on material acquisition, not a complete renunciation of material goods. Frugality is not only a Christian virtue, it has its origins in classical philosophy. Plato taught a moderation of the passions. In his philosophy, the properly ordered soul is governed by reason, and the insatiable appetites which crave sensual gratification and the exercise of ignoble emotions, these things are subordinated to the governance of reason. And in Aristotle, the virtue called temperance is a golden mean between overindulgence and deficiency. Happiness cannot be had in a deficiency of possessions, nor in overindulgence in luxuries and sensual gratification. The golden mean is in moderation, or what James A. Nash would call frugality. Both Plato and Aristotle call for moderation of human cravings, but not asceticism or holy poverty. Plato and Aristotle would like frugality. Frugality as an individual spiritual virtue challenges the advertising propaganda that tells us we need to outbuy our neighbor. The greed preached by advertising disrupts Christian love and solidarity with one's fellows by creating competition and hostilities among people. I know of two friends from Florida, one of whom went out and bought a Maserati, and his friend the next day went out and bought a Ferrari. Consumption has been a way of acquiring self-esteem and supposed superiority over our fellows. Not having generates envy and feelings of inadequacy for which we think spending is the solution. Shopping has also become a recreation. In the face of all this, frugality challenges competitive spending by replacing the greed, gluttony, envy, and vanity of conspicuous consumption with solidarity with one's fellows and with moderate material possessions. This idea can be generalized to world economies and to ecology. Our Western economy is set up to feed an insatiable appetite for consumer goods by means of unbridled production. When our unmoderated appetites seek gratification, then we tend to exploit nature's limited resources and create unmanageable waste. The belief behind this ecologically unsound economic system is that productivity must continually grow in order to sustain economic health. Maybe it doesn't. Present-day consumption and production, which is structured to fulfill human cravings for more, bigger, better, newer, more prestigious goods, we can call that kind of an economy an anthropocentric economy, or a human-centered economy. A new relationship between consumer demand and industrial production that's more sensitive to the natural ecosystem needs to be established. What is called for is not an anthropocentric economy, but rather an ecocentric economy. This is the subversive element of frugality. Frugality is subversive because it challenges the assumption that ever-expanding markets are necessary for economic health. Frugality can be generalized to a global ethic as well. In order for frugality to serve our present, to solve our present ecological crisis, it needs to become global. Just as individuals moderate the acquisition of material luxuries in order for others to have necessities, so wealthy and powerful nations need to moderate their excessive demand for the world's resources so that less wealthy nations may have basic necessities. Wealthy nations cannot engulf the limited resources of the planet, while poorer nations possess little, often not even enough. Frugality in this sense can be thought of in the light of Christian love and charity. Frugality as a planetary ethic means that the whole world economy needs to be considered. Just as charitable giving is practiced by individuals, so in the world economy, wealthy and powerful nations need to balance their wants for luxury against simply providing necessities for poorer nations. Finally, frugality is the realization that the whole created order is a sacred ecological system, and humans are part of God's created universe, as are water, land, and mineral resources, air, plants, and animals. What is called for is not only reverence for nature, but rather the recognition that humans are nature also. The natural world isn't sacred space set off from the world of humans. Rather, humans in the natural world are all part of the same sacred space. Ecological problems happen when we forget that humans share the sacred space created by God with the natural order. When we think that we stand apart from nature, then we view the natural world as something other than ourselves. Then we think that our relationship with nature is as subject and object. We're the subject, nature's the object to be exploited according to human avarice. When humans and nature are one, then we will have health on the planet. This relationship of oneness with nature is captured in the Hebrew word shalom, which we usually translate as peace. But the Hebrew word for peace, shalom, means more than the cessation of war. It does include peace in the human realm, but it also includes the well-being of the whole created order. It means rain falling in season. It means fecundity of crops and health and fertility of livestock. Since humans, animals, plants, the land and its mineral resources and water are all sacred creations of God, peace, shalom, means the well-being of all creation, the whole sacred order. I'll read a little bit from Isaiah 55, verse 2. For you shall go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall break into singing, and all the trees of the field shall clasp their hands. Perhaps the flourishing of the whole created order is captured in the word shalom even more clearly in Isaiah 32. That passage speaks of a time when, quote, the Spirit is poured upon us from on high, and the wilderness becomes a fruitful field, and the fruitful field is deemed a forest. Then justice will dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness abide in the fruitful field. And the effect of righteousness will be peace, and the result of righteousness, quietness and trust forever. My people will abide in a peaceful habitation, in secure dwellings, and in a quiet resting places. To sum up, frugality is the right relation between a person and God, between person and person, and between humanity and nature. Frugality is a personal virtue that means right relationship with God, and the right relationship is established by subduing and moderating greed, envy, gluttony, and vanity. These passions, called cardinal sins, are vexations, and they cause restlessness and discontent. And this restlessness and discontent breaks up peace and solidarity with one's fellows. They'll incline somebody to buy a Ferrari after their friend buys a Maserati. Frugality, combined with Christian charity, brings peace and contentment with moderate possessions, and establishes a caring and giving relationship with one's fellows. Frugality means moderation of craving for more, better, more prestigious, newer goods to assuage feelings of inadequacy and in struggles for imagined social supremacy. As a global ethic, frugality means moderating excessive exploitation of limited natural resources by powerful and wealthy nations, so that there are sufficient resources for the needs of less wealthy and less powerful nations. Finally, frugality is the reestablishment of sacred integration of humans in the natural world. It is the recognition that humanity is part of God's sacred creation, and that nature is not something other which can be exploited to fulfill the wants of an anthropocentric economics. When frugality is a personal virtue, a global ethic, and a sacred relationship with nature, then the words of Isaiah will be fulfilled. You shall go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall break forth in singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Thank you.